Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody to Awareness Technologies webinar today. We're going to be talking about data breaches and cybersecurity, and we'll talk some about security measures for your mobile technologies. My name is Kristen, and I'm going to be walking you through this presentation today. A few pieces of housekeeping before we get started. I do want to note that everybody is currently on mute. If you do have any questions, there is a question section of the GoToWebinar. Please feel free to type it in there, and I'll answer any questions that you have at the end of the webinar. The webinar is being recorded, so if you do want to review this information later or you want a copy of the slide deck, please just reach out to us. We'll also send out an email. Just let us know that you want to have a chance to review that. If you do have any additional questions that you want to have more of a one-on-one conversation about, happy to provide contact information at the end of the webinar. Please feel free to reach out and let us know. So with all that said, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So what are we going to talk about today? Today's agenda. So we're going to talk about some recent data breaches. We'll talk about data breaches that are specifically in financial institutions, and we'll talk about just some interesting data breaches that have happened in general. We'll talk about how mobile technologies have really shifted that perimeter of security that you've established within your branches or your office locations. And then we'll talk some about some security measures that you can put in place to help you mitigate this risk. So before I get started, just really briefly want to tell you who we are so that you have a sense of who's talking to you about this and how we understand the market space. So Awareness Technologies, we have an internal threat prevention platform. We basically have a software that gets installed on your individual desktops, laptops, mobile devices. It allows you to monitor and control what's going on those end devices so that you can see what happens regardless of where that computer or device is at. We do work basically in a number of industries, but primarily folks that are highly regulated, government, financial institutions, obviously banks, credit unions, healthcare, and then a mix of SMB, some education, a little bit of everything else. So basically anywhere where somebody has confidential data that they're concerned about. So that's who we are. So let's jump right into the conversation, which is what you guys are here for. So what's at stake when we talk about data breaches and cybersecurity procedures? So there's a nice quote here from a CUNA mutual group meeting that basically said, network security is only as strong as the weakest link. And you can have an airtight data system, but if a third-party provider you use lacks or a laptop containing confidential data goes missing, your credit union is at risk. So I'm sure you guys are aware of, you're only as strong as your weakest link or your weakest player. So what we're kind of talking about here is that network security can be airtight, but you add in these mobile devices, you add in laptops that can walk around, whatever it might be, you add in something that maybe isn't as strong. And all of a sudden now you've created this hole with which data can obviously come in, but obviously data can also go out that way. So how do you resolve that? So what I wanted to do is take a look at some recent sample breaches, talk about how that breach or that data breach happened, and then talk about how to resolve it. So kind of pointing out where those weakest links were in each one of these scenarios. So this is a Bank of America data breach that occurred. The estimated cost of it was $10 million. What happened was insider theft. So in this case, there was a employee that was taking customer information that they had access to as part of their ability to do their job. They needed to have access to it, but they weren't looking at what this employee was doing with the data after they accessed it. And this person happened to be copying it to Excel documents, and then they were taking that information and they were selling it to an identity theft ring. So here you're only as strong as your weakest player. In this case, your weakest player wanted to steal from you. And they did it by using your systems, but by kind of skirting outside of your normal access controls. This one is a credit union. The cost was, they estimated between 10 and 16 million, and it was basically a fraud example. So the court documents on this one show that an employee allegedly altered and modified Corporate One FCU bank account statements for examiners. So again, somebody was going in on their computer. They were tampering and editing something that they were supposed to be providing out. So what's happening there is that someone's creating a fraud incident. They're doing it on their work computer, but because you're not monitoring that system, you're having a hole there for people to be able to access. This one's not a bank or a credit union. It was AT&T. There's not an estimated cost on this just yet. It's an instance of insider abuse. So basically says here that authorized insiders had access to provisioning systems, and they were provisioning they were basically misprovisioning devices. So they were providing information out and being able to steal information by using the provisioning system. So again, they've limited down their access. They've given their trusted user access into the system, and their user is taking advantage of that. This is a hospital, UMass Memorial. It was a long-term fraud. Basically, what happened was a data breach involving an insider at UMass Memorial, which could date back as far as 12 years. They were taking information, personal confidential information, and they were selling that. So the interesting part about this one compared to the other ones is the length of time that it took. So this is a good example of if you're not monitoring somebody just because they seem like they have seniority, you don't realize that all of a sudden this person's been stealing information and that they've potentially been stealing it for a long time. So I happen to highlight the insider part of it, and the reason for that is because according to Forrester, they did a research on this, insiders are the top source of breaches. Now, all the examples we provided, obviously here were malicious intent, but it is about 36% of the breaches stem from inadvertent misuse of data by employees. So really most of the time people are making a mistake. It's not malicious, but it doesn't really matter, right? Once the data is out there, once information has been breached, it doesn't matter if the person did it maliciously or not. You're still just as liable for that information one way or the other. The other causes obviously were malicious attempts and fraud. So how does it happen when it's an accident? Things like disclosing information in error, lost or stolen paperwork, lost or stolen hardware, lost in transit, things go down the line as to what might happen. But the big thing is really that that people have accidents, right? Human nature is that an accident is going to occur. It's your job to be monitoring to see when those accidents occur to make sure that information doesn't go out, or that you do know it actually was an accident. It wasn't something that someone's been doing for several years, like our UMass Memorial as an example. So this goes back to that Forrester research, and it's a really good quote, and it's something that we talk a lot about when we talk about cybersecurity and data breach prevention. And we say, and here Heidi, who's a Forrester analyst, says this as well, but people don't know what they don't know. So in general, I think we tend to say, well, our systems are locked down really well and we know what we're looking for. But the reality is a lot of times you just don't know what you don't know within your system. You don't know what people are doing. You don't know if they mean to do it accidentally or maliciously. The other thing is that people, a lot of times, users don't know what they should and shouldn't do oftentimes, and you really got to give them some kind of guidance and guardrails to work with. So you got to let them know this kind of data is sensitive. This doesn't leave the organization. If they go to send an email with that kind of information in it, a message should pop up and guide them to let them know that they're doing this incorrectly. Something should kind of give them that guidance to let them know what they should and shouldn't be doing. So there's accidents that happen, obviously. The other thing is mobile technologies. And a lot of times these incidents that occur on mobile technologies are really something that, again, is accidental. So this is a principal research analyst over at Gartner who's saying a classic example of why there's data breaches on mobile technologies is misconfiguration and misuse of personal cloud services through apps residing on smartphones and tablets. It says when used to convey enterprise data, these apps lead to data leaks that the organization remains unaware of for the majority of the devices. That means that you've given me an iPhone and I access my mail on it, and my mail is backed up to iCloud, or I transition and take a document out of my mail and I send it to my personal cloud storage on my device, whatever it might be. And maybe I didn't realize I was doing something I shouldn't be doing. You probably certainly don't realize I've just done it because it's on my mobile device, which is outside of your network. And now most likely, if a data breach occurs, you're not even aware of where it happened at. It's completely outside of the grid of what you normally monitor. And I really basically just circumvented your system. So not only do you not know what you don't know, I also didn't really have any guidelines to know whether I should or shouldn't have been doing that. I was just accessing the data on my phone like I normally access it, save it where I normally save my kind of data at. Another thing that happens on mobile devices that can obviously cause an issue is jailbreaking. So if you're not familiar with jailbreaking, you're basically kind of, it's specifically really for iOS devices. You're taking your iPhone, iPad, and you're writing over what Apple has restricted you to be able to do or not do. So you're basically kind of breaking the phone, you're jailbreaking the phone. And so this allows users to access certain device resources that are normally inaccessible, and that puts data at danger. So obviously this can remove app-specific protections. We talk a lot about iPhones are particularly good with this, which is that everything's sandboxed. An individual app can't talk to another app within an iOS system. When you jailbreak it, that changes. So now something like malware could get put onto that device. You could have a number of different attacks on that. And that means that enterprise data that might be on that device is at risk. So as you can imagine, you've given somebody access to corporate mail or corporate files, whatever it might be on their mobile or iPhone, iPad, whatever device. They jailbreak it. And they're doing that because they have personal reasons. So they want to be able to install something on that phone or change some setting on there that they don't really think has any repercussion for you as the business. And now any data that you have on that device, the security has been weakened there. So again, you don't know what you don't know on that device. I don't know I shouldn't have done it. And it's not malicious. And when I was doing it, I wasn't even thinking about the company's data when I did it. I was doing it for other personal reasons. So again, that's something where when you provide out these devices, you're completely circumventing your guys' normal network security that you have locked down. You would never let somebody take a laptop and, completely write over the operating system that you've installed onto it for them to run their own custom code. So the same kind of procedures and protections that you put on your network devices, you really need to be thinking about for your mobile devices as well. The biggest one, obviously, as well is lost laptop and devices. Going back to that original CUNA quote from the beginning, where we talk about, one third-party vendor being weak or a lost or stolen laptop. So I thought the best way to talk about lost or stolen laptops is I did a quick Google of it, and I just looked at recent lost or stolen laptop that were big stories. So this is, just the biggest guys basically. And so you can see Coca-Cola had one that was 74,000, Horizon Blue Cross 840,000, and then there's a family healthcare clinic there with 620,000 records. These are big guys. These are guys who get in the news when it happens, but the reality is that there's probably a lot of smaller ones out there where this is happening. And you might not make the news, but it doesn't mean you're not going to have big repercussions for your organization if a laptop or a device goes lost or stolen. So you used to have to just worry about those laptops going lost or stolen. Now you have to worry about phones and iPads and tablets and whatever else the credit union is using now that might be mobile, and that information going lost or stolen. And really everything that's on there is your most sensitive data. So if we go back to that quote, we talk about network security only as strong as your weakest link, and looking at one thing can kind of cause a whole problem. We've really narrowed it down to saying, you really need to look at those mobile devices. That's your biggest hole in there. You know what your insiders, what they have access to. You should be looking at what they're doing. And when you start locking down that protection on desktops and on laptops, that's great. And you start to take those steps to acknowledge that, listen, my insiders are my greatest asset, but they're also kind of my greatest weakness here in terms of what they have access to. So let's look at their desktops. Let's look at their laptops. Let's make sure they can't do what they can't do on there. But then you're like, well, and their phones or whatever, because their kids' pictures are on there, and I don't want to get involved in monitoring that, or I don't want to lock that thing down. And I think we just really have this very nonchalant attitude to mobile devices. But the reality is they're a computer in your pocket. They should be locked down the same way that you would lock down a laptop or a desktop within the branch. So what are some recommendations here? One is that, you monitor the employees, obviously, but you use that data collected to kind of guide the employees on the errors that are being made. So really going back to, again, what you don't know, and the guidelines for what to provide people. We always tell people, and this is the second point, which is that we always say, tell people they're being monitored. Tell employees, listen, if you want to have access to your email on your laptop, on your phone, on whatever it is, there's a level of monitoring we're going to have to do for that, and let them know why. And the reason is because, one, we want to make sure that if there's any accidents, we understand what happened. It goes down to this next data point. We know the who, what, when, where, of how of what happened, that we know how to guide you going forward if there's an incident, on what the proper procedures for handling that kind of data or that kind of incident might be. And then also, we obviously recommend notifying employees, because when people know that they're being monitored, they're less likely to do malicious activities. And I think you guys know that to some extent, because that's why there's things like security cameras in branches, or even when you go to the store somewhere, there's a reason there's a security camera there. And it's not necessarily because, someone's sitting there and they're going to come flying out behind the door the minute something happens. One is it acts as a deterrent, and people don't do things, or at least they think twice before they do things. And the other reason is, if something does happen, if that candy bar goes missing, we can look back at the videotape and we can say, okay, well, here's where it fell into your pocket, or here's where you picked it up and put it into your pocket. So it's the difference between, guessing about what happened during data breach and knowing what happened. And I think anybody who's dealt with auditors knows that it's always better to know what happened than to be guessing for it. So really, you want to treat internal security with the same seriousness as you do external security, whether it be security from the stance of, you're looking at your firewalls and your IDS and your IPS, and you're making sure the bad guys in foreign countries aren't hacking your systems. Absolutely makes perfect sense. That doesn't mean something's not going to happen from the inside. So the same reason you put up that security camera, the same reason you do all those things to make sure all the bad guys from the outside don't hurt your company, that's the same things you need to be doing on the inside. And I think we hear a lot of these data breach stories in the news. You hear Target, and you hear Home Depot, and you hear all these things. Those guys are big names, and you're going to hear that. You don't hear as much of the smaller ones, and you don't hear as much of the fraud out there, because people have to kind of cover that up quickly. But I think it's going to be something that is going to be more in the news than it already is. And it's obviously something that you would have to notify all of your members of. So it's a really big issue. And so to be honest, it looks a lot worse, right, when it's an incident from the inside versus the outside. Not that either scenario is great, but you want to be securing that inside. So you want to know who did what, when. You want to record everything that takes place. It doesn't mean you're going to sit there and watch all the footage that's taken place within those, desktops, laptops, phones, tablets, but it does mean it's there, so that when you have to go back from a forensic standpoint, you can. You want to set up alerts, so all of a sudden Kristen is copying a lot of data to her Dropbox from her phone, or she's copying a lot of data to Excel spreadsheets, and she doesn't normally use Excel spreadsheets at work, so that's strange. And then you want to prevent things, so that when I go to send that Excel spreadsheet that has all of the customer and account numbers, that it actually blocks that from going out on the organization, and it alerts you of what's going on. So you really want to take kind of a three-pronged approach there. So one of the things that we can do, if you're interested, we can set you up with a free trial of our software, see how that might be able to help you out with this from an internal threat prevention side. You can give us a call, send us an email if you're interested in anything, have any questions. But I am coming up just about on the 20-minute mark, so I do want to take a break, answer any questions that you might have out there. Feel free to just type them in the go-to webinar section, and we'll take it from there. And I'll give you guys a second now to type them out, and then we'll answer that. And like I said, I'll also send out a recording of all this afterwards, so you can review it then. So any questions?